we did an introduction last night for those of you that weren't here, and we're going to very quickly walk through the introduction again. Not the whole thing, but those of us that have been in this message very long would look at this and automatically think that they know what it represents. They would say, this is the first decree, the second decree, the third decree that went forth in 457. This is the first angel's message, second angel's message, third angel's message that arrived in 1844. Okay? And that would be a correct assumption, but that's not what this represents. Okay? We're going to deal with Ezra 7:9 today. And in verse 9, it talks about Ezra leaving Babylon on the first day of the first month and arriving in Jerusalem on the first day of the fifth month with the decree in his hand that went into effect on the 10th day of the seventh month. Okay? So this is not the first, second, and third angel's message. This is the first day of the first month, the first day of the fifth month, and the 10th day of the seventh month. That's what's down here. Do you understand? Okay, now we're going to show today, if you're not familiar with it, that the first day of the first month is the tearing time in the history of the Millerites. And the first day of the fifth month is the midnight, when the midnight cry arrives in the history of the Millerites. But in this movement, we know that the Millerite history here, it's repeated to the very letter down here in our history. So this is our history today, and we're going to take the characteristics of these waymarks that are established upon two witnesses. The witness of the history of Ezra in 457, the witness of the history of the Millerites in 1844, and with those two witnesses, we will take the characteristics of these three waymarks and bring them to our history. And it just so happens that these three waymarks are the waymarks that explain, amplify the midnight cry. And thus, I'm pretty certain that's why Brother Steve was speaking about the midnight cry in his introduction. All right, last night we went over some truths, prophetic truths that I thought needed to be in place before we really grapple with this subject today. On page 1 of your notes, last night, if you weren't here, we didn't cover all these notes. We went all over the place, but we're still only going to refer you to some of them. We dealt with the seven thunders. Most of us in this movement understand the seven thunders represent the history of the Millerites from 1798 to 1844, and they also represent the repetition of that history in our day and age. But some of us haven't followed further on as the line of the tribe of Judah opened up the seven thunders. There's other representation of the seven thunders, and one that I wanted to put in the record was the seven kings, okay, and I had a reason for doing that. On the bottom of page 2, you can see the seven kings, the last seven kings of Judah in order: Manasseh, Ammon, Josiah, Jehoiahaz, Jehoiakim, Jehoiachin, Zedekiah. And what I'm saying is those last seven kings of Judah also represent the seven thunders. And we dealt with that a little bit last night. Manasseh being the seventh from the last. He is where we mark the beginning of the 2520, and Jesus illustrates the end from the beginning, and Manasseh represents a progressive overthrow of Judah. Judah was a two-horned power. It was Judah and Benjamin. And when you start the 2520 in 677, it concludes in 1844, and in 1844 you have the first horn of the glorious land of the United States overthrown, when the Protestants cease to be God's chosen people and begin to fulfill their role as the false prophet of Bible prophecy. That takes place in this history. Thus, in this history, back here in 677 with the seven kings, it'd be back here, Manasseh represents seven kings that are identifying a progressive fall of the glorious land, Judah, a two-horned power. And when that 2520 comes into history here, it's marking the beginning of a progressive fall of the two-horned power, the glorious land, the United States. And in the Millerite history, the first horn is overthrown, the church. In our history, the second horn is overthrown, the state. Okay, so looking at these 7 kings as this another revelation of the 7 thunders allows us to tie the 2520 into the Millerite history and even our history. But it allows us to see that the names of the 7 kings also add a dimension to the truth that we want to see. Because the last 3 kings, Jehoiakim, Jehoiachin, and Zedekiah, their names correspond to August 11th, 1840, when the angel came down out of heaven, put 1 foot upon the land and 1 foot upon the sea, when the first angel's message was empowered, Jehoiakim. Therefore, Jehoiakim typifies 9/11. Jehoiachin, part of the definition of his name, is tarrying time. Okay, the tarrying time is this waymark right here, and therefore it marks when the second angel come down. All right, Jehoiachin is marking the arrival of the second angel. Jehoiachin, empowerment of the first angel. Zedekiah, same Hebrew word that is translated as cleansed. In Daniel 8:14, Zedekiah, the last of the 7 kings, is identifying October 22nd, 1844, when the sanctuary is cleansed. We wanted to have those names in place because when we get to these waymarks here, we'll be able to draw upon the meaning of those kings and amplify what's being taught here about the first day of the first month, first day of the 5th month, 10th day of the 7th month. Okay? So it's in your record what those names mean. I will refer to those, Lord willing, later on today, and you'll see that their names and the place they arrive in history means something to us here at the end of the world. I had in there I have a reason. If you go back and look at what was recorded last night, I have a reason that I'm going to tell you, and it will appear self-serving, and probably the majority that hear this tape will decide it is self-serving. But I had a reason last night to be pointing out some of the truths that this ministry, Future for America, has been grappling with over the years. Okay? I want to put in the record for this study for a purposeful reason that I do not think is self-serving, but it will be portrayed that way. That there are truths that this ministry has been grappling with, that they've been recognizing, beginning in 1989 to this very day. All right? Now, there is a reason for saying that fits into this study. Okay, but for instance, one of the histories that illustrates our history is the history of Elijah at Carmel. All right, now we've taught this for many moons in this movement, so some of you will understand this. And there's, of course, many lessons to be learned from Elijah at Carmel. But Sister White plainly says that William Miller was Elijah. Okay, so you have the right to place the Millerite history into the prophetic history of Carmel. And you know that when Elijah is on his way to Carmel, it's after 1,260 days of drought when Jezebel was ruling. And you know that when William Miller was on his way, it was after 1,260 years when the papacy / Jezebel was ruling. So Millerite history, easy to line up with the story of Elijah. So one of the things I want you to see there, a couple of things, is in the story of Elijah, the false prophets get to do their dance of deception first. The counterfeit always precedes the true. And Elijah is the true. Okay? But what's going on in that history when you bring it down to the time of the Millerites, it is being demonstrated who is the true prophet and who is the false prophet. And sure enough, when you get to the first day of the first month in the history of the Millerites, the Protestants fail the test, and the second angel comes down. This is the last waymark for the cleansing of the Protestant temple. Their first waymark was August 11th, 1840, when divinity flashed through humanity, when the angel of Revelation 10 come down. The second test is always a visual test, and their visual test was the 1843 chart. But when 1843 ended, at the first disappointment, the door closed for the Protestants, and the majority of the Protestants separated from the Millerites. The door for the Protestants closed right here. And from this point on in the Millerite history, Sister White's clear, the Millerites came to understand that the Protestants had become the daughters of Babylon. Okay, and the daughters of Babylon is the false prophet of Bible prophecy. The Millerite history was demonstrating who the false prophet was. It was the fallen Protestant churches who fell by rejecting the first angel's message, and vice versa. The Millerites were identified as Elijah, the true prophet. Everyone follow that logic? Okay, so if you follow that logic, this is where you got to hesitate. This is repeated in our history, brothers and sisters. Okay? From the time when the angel comes down, when Islam is restrained, there's going to be a work that's accomplished by Christ that is going to demonstrate who's the true prophet and who's the false prophet. Okay? So I just want to put in the record in that regard, and there's other lines to demonstrate this fact, that there is truths that Future for America has been grappling with since 1989 that allow you to see what we're going to share, but some of us over the past 7 or 8 years haven't been paying too much attention to it because we've been watching other things take place before our eyes. Okay? So, in page 3, you'll see also the last 7 kings of the northern kingdom. All right? I'm not going to take time for that, but if you look at the names of those last 7 kings after these meetings, and if you understand what takes place in the Sunday law crisis, when God's other children are called out of Babylon, you'll see the last 7 kings of Israel, the northern kingdom, are typifying the final ingathering of the 11th hour workers. And I'm just saying, here's another revelation of the 7 thunders, okay? The Lord isn't done unsealing the 7 thunders. But you got to open your eyes to see. All right? I mean, I'm not trying to be critical. I'm just saying that's the fact. We can't see if we don't open our eyes, all right? Now, on page 4, in dealing where you have information about what I've already said last night and this morning about Manasseh being a progressive fall, in the box, the big box on page 4, from Great Controversy 389, she's identifying that the second angel's message, which arrives here in the Millerite history, okay, this is the second angel's message, it marks the beginning of a progressive fall. Right there, the horn of Protestant America is conquered, all right? But Protestant America, the glorious land isn't fully conquered till our history when the horn of state is conquered. And Sister White's saying this. Second angel's message represents a progressive fall. It begins in the history of the Millerites. It ends in our history. That's what Manasseh is teaching us, progressive fall. And she says that the second angel's message, the perfect fulfillment of it is yet future. Therefore, the second angel's message in the Millerite history was imperfect. All right? To page 7. Last night we went over the characteristics of the parable of the 10 virgins, and on the bottom of page 7 there's a quote I won't read, but if you're serious about believing that the Millerite history is repeated in our history, if you read the paragraph on the bottom of page 7 and the next paragraph when it's continued on page 8, you'll find that at this point, the first disappointment for the Millerites, when the second angel arrives, April 19th, 1844, that the Lord removed his hand from the mistake in the figures on that chart, and when he did so, the faithful ones saw that the evidence that had led them to present that the 2520 and the 2300 in 1843 then proved that it actually was fulfilled in 1844. If you believe in the repetition of the Millerite history to the very letter, then that's telling you that at 9/11, when the Lord leads his people back to the old path, they will recognize this history about the 2520, and they will be presenting to the Adventist church that the Millerites thought the 2520 ended in 1843, but they came to understand that it ended in 1844, and they will present this truth of the 2520 to the Adventist Church. But what happened to the Millerites when they presented this truth, and they presented it from here to here? From the first disappointment to the tarrying time. That's what the faithful Millerites were presenting to the churches, is that we were wrong that the 2520 ended in 1843. It actually ends in 1844. And when they did that, they suffered the wrath of the Protestants. So that's telling us that at 9/11, we're going to be teaching the 2520 to the Adventist Church, and we're going to suffer the wrath for doing so, because this history is repeated to the very letter. It's also teaching us that if we're not doing that, we're a foolish virgin, or we're something else other than a wise virgin. Okay? So you got to put you need to recognize that, I believe. Now the next thing, on page 8, the tarrying time was recognized. Brothers and sisters, I had another question this morning. There's some of us in this movement that are teaching that at 9/11 the tarrying time arrives. That's correct, on several witnesses. But there's some of us that are teaching that at 9/11 the day of the Lord arrived. Okay, the day of the Lord in the parable of the 10 virgins is where the door closes. Okay, so just type in the day of the Lord to the Bible in Spirit of Prophecy. The day of the Lord comes as a thief at the night, and the emphasis of the thief in the night is when the thief comes, there's no time to prepare. Probation closes. Okay, the day of the Lord is where the door closes in the parable. The tarrying time precedes the closing of the door in the parable. We should understand this because the parable of the 10 virgins illustrates the experience of the Adventist people. Okay, so because of where we're at, there's some of us that are teaching the day of the Lord arrived at 9/11, when it actually arrives at the Sunday law. There's actually one personality that's teaching that the day of the Lord arrived in 1844, which is bizarre, to say the least, okay? But because of our willingness to pick and choose on what we're going to teach, the lesson of the tarrying time is obscured to God's people. But what I want you to see is in the Millerite history, Sister White tells us that the faithful ones recognized they were in the tarrying time. Therefore, we have to recognize that we're in the tarrying time. And I'm here to tell you the tarrying time begins in 9/11, and if someone's leading you to believe that 9/11 is the day of the Lord, then it kind of makes it harder for you to recognize the implications of what it means to be in the tarrying time. And I'm telling you, if you don't know you're in the tarrying time, you're preparing for the mark of the beast. It's that serious. And because I understand that, based upon several thus saith the Lord, when I get to these kind of points, I get a little bit animated, and then everyone says, oh, he's being kind of critical and mean-spirited. Brothers and sisters, we're about ready to die. We're about ready to die. What are you supposed to do? It's the end of the world. The next one is the one that all of us miss. We don't want to deal with this. If 9/11 is the beginning of the tarrying time here that leads to the midnight cry, if we're in this history, we don't want to deal with this next one because Sister White is absolutely crystal clear that it's in this history here that we're in right now that the fanaticism comes in. I don't want to know that because I happen to like that guy and that guy and that guy. I like all of them. I don't care if they're teaching different messages. I like them. Brothers and sisters, this is where the fanaticism comes in, and you are required to know what's being taught among you. Maybe you think you can walk through the end of the world and not make a distinction between truth and error, but you may very well have a responsibility to clarify the truth for your brothers and sisters that don't have that spiritual strength. And if they're not told the difference between truth and error, they may die. Of course, I don't even accept the first premise. I think all of us have to recognize the truth and stand on the truth. All right, so notice under fanaticism, from Great Controversy 398. It was not the proclamation of the second advent that caused fanaticism and division. This is when the message is empowered on August 11th, 1840. These appeared in the summer of 1844. Fanaticism appeared in the summer of 1844. When Adventists were in a state of doubt and perplexity concerning their real position. This is the first disappointment, the tearing time. Now they're wondering what happened. I thought the Lord was going to come in 1843, but 1843 is past. I'm in a state of doubt and uncertainty. The empowerment of the first angel's message on August 11th, 1840, it was powerful. The Lord's coming in 1843. No fanaticism in that movement. But when 1843 passes, they're in a place of doubt and uncertainty concerning their real position. The preaching of the first angel's message and of the midnight cry. The preaching here from 1840 to here, and the preaching of the midnight cry. These two sections of the history, they're so powerful that fanaticism, it just isn't going to be around, all right? This is the preaching of the first angel's message and of the midnight cry tended directly to repress fanaticism and dissension. Those who participated in these solemn movements were in harmony. Their hearts were filled with love for one another and for Jesus, whom they expected soon to see. The one faith, the one blessed hope lifted them above the control of any human influence and proved a shield against the assaults of Satan. Now, maybe you're not following the logic of my illustration here. What I'm saying is, in the Millerite history, this is the first disappointment that came on April 19th, 1844. And I know this may be too small for the camera back there, but I have a lot of stuff to put here, and I can't get it all in with big letters. This is August 15th, 1844. This is October 22nd, 1844. And from here, over here where my hand is, August 11th, 1840, the first angel's message is empowered. There's no fanaticism here. It's too powerful. But after the first disappointment, fanaticism comes in. But it ends at the midnight cry. Therefore, if we understand that the tearing time of the virgins and the tearing time of the Millerites is typifying 9/11, then from 9/11 until the midnight cry, fanaticism will be here. This is the waymark that has the fanaticism marked in that. Now, do you see the logic even if you haven't proved it for yourself? Amen. Okay, if you see the logic, then what I'm saying, brothers and sisters, is if we're bringing this to the end of the world, then this section of time from 9/11 until the midnight cry, that's where the fanaticism is, and therefore, every representation of false teaching and fanaticism that's recorded in the Bible meets its perfect fulfillment in this history. Because that's what this movement has been teaching all along. All the prophets speak more about the end of the world than the days in which they lived. This history here, this is where the prophets of Baal are doing their dance of deception. This is where Salome is doing her dance. This is where Jesus warns you about false teachers and the wolves that have sheep's clothing on them. But even if you accept that, you could say, well, that's talking about those false teachers out in the structure of Adventism, or it's talking about the false teachers in the Protestant world or the Catholic world or the Buddhists. Brothers and sisters, that's a real flimsy excuse to try to use to not accept your responsibility, to realize that this history here, the Lord is trying to purify a people to lift up an ensign, and He takes those people from this message. This fanaticism is about this message. Okay? Now, you'll see a quote from Joshua Himes to William Miller. The only reason I have that in there is because I don't think we've wrapped our minds around the fact about this fanaticism. But this is Himes talking to William Miller. Himes is finally settling into Samuel Snow's message of the midnight cry, and one of the reasons he's doing it is because he realizes this midnight cry message, it overcomes any fanaticism. It's too powerful for fanaticism to exist. That's in this history. So Himes says to Miller, on September 30th, Joshua Himes wrote a letter to Miller indicating that he was softening to Samuel Snow's understanding of the midnight cry. He says, this thing has gone over the country like lightning. That's what Brother Steve was reading. Nearly every lecturer has come into it and are preaching it with zeal and great success. It had done away with all fanaticism. Now, you may not think that this is an important characteristic of this history, brothers and sisters, but it is. And if you go back into the history of the Exeter camp meeting, I think I shared this last night, but I'm going to put it in the record one more time. At the Exeter camp meeting where Samuel Snow presented the Midnight Cry message, before he got there on the 14th, there was a group of people that were in the movement that were wrapped up in fanaticism, and there was a tent next door to where Samuel Snow presented his message, where the fanatics were hanging out, and they were having all kinds of fanatical presentations and fanatical manifestations. Did you know that? It's part of the historical record. Two tents on that campground. One of them was in full-blown fanaticism, and when Samuel Snow got done, they were totally silent. It silenced them, okay? So what I'm saying is, even the historical record marks that from here to here, the fanaticism rages, all right? You get my point? Do you believe that Millerite history was sacred history? Yes, it's just as sacred as the history of Moses, all right? That tent full of fanatics was there to teach you and I a lesson. We're in a history of fanaticism. All right, moving on. The fall of the Protestant churches here was a progressive fall. Page 9, we're dealing with that. The Protestant churches are being used as the illustration of the progressive fall. They're rejecting the present truth message, but it wasn't an immediate fall, it's progressive. 2 temple cleansings, page 10. The one thing I want you to see here is the 2 temple cleansings which we dealt with. I sensed that there was more confusion about that part of the presentation last night than other parts. But in the second quote there under Malachi 3:1-4, you have to see this. It says, in cleansing the temple from the world's buyers and sellers, Jesus announced his mission to cleanse the heart from the defilement of sin, from the earthly desires, the selfish lusts, the evil habits that corrupt the soul. Malachi 3:1-3 quoted. Okay, what you have to see, I believe what you have to see is that the 2 temple cleansings are a fulfillment of Malachi 3. This isn't the only place that Sister White references the 2 temple cleansings with Malachi 3. The reason you have to see that is because in Malachi 3, verses 2 and 3, the messenger of the covenant, who is Christ, he comes to purify the sons of Levi. All right? The purification of the sons of Levi is a very important understanding, because you'll find when you look at all the references in the Bible to the first day of the 5th month, that on the first day of the 5th month, which is when the midnight cry arrives, on the first day of the 5th month, Aaron dies. And the Bible teaches us that when Aaron dies, the Levites are selected. So the first day of the 5th month, because that's where the Levites get selected, it pulls Malachi 3 into that line of teaching, because the Levites in Malachi 3 are being prepared as an offering in righteousness. From here to here, there is an offering being prepared. And the offering is made up of those virgins at this point that have oil in their vessels. They're the Levites that are being purified, and you have to see this because you want to see how this connects with the sanctuary service. All right? And don't forget that when Christ began the sanctuary service in heaven, that he poured the latter rain out upon his disciples as what? A signal that he had begun his work as the heavenly high priest. But in that ceremony, he brought an offering with him. What was the offering? It was the offering of the first fruit of the dead, because there were people that were resurrected when he was resurrected, and he brought them with him to initiate this sanctuary service. When he's going to initiate a new ceremony, begin a ceremony in the sanctuary, he brings an offering with him. And that offering in our history is made up by the wise virgins that have the oil in their vessels when the midnight cry comes. And from here, to when they're going to be offered in the sanctuary as an offering, the messenger of the covenant is purifying them. All right, so you got to see that. That's why you got to see Malachi 3 in this. Malachi 3 is connected with the two temple cleansings. All right. Page 12. Still just reviewing last night. Some things we talked about, some things I forgot. On page 12, it says, the first angel, I was shown the interest which all heaven had taken in the work going on upon the earth. Jesus commissioned a mighty angel to descend and warn the inhabitants of the earth to prepare for his second coming. As the angel left the presence of Jesus in heaven, an exceeding bright and glorious light went before him. I was told that his mission was to lighten the earth with his glory. Brothers and sisters, this is the first angel. This is the first angel. This is the angel that came down on August 11th, 1840. But Sister White here is telling us that his mission was to lighten the earth with his glory. She's saying that his work is identical to the work of the angel of Revelation 18. And the first angel came down in the Millerite history when Islam was restrained. Pointing forward to our history, when the angel of Revelation 18 comes down, when Islam is restrained. And Revelation 10 tells us that when that angel came down, he had a little book open in his hand, and they were required to eat it. It's always a test on appetite. From Adam onward. Little book for the Millerites. Manna for the children of Israel. The bread of heaven for Israel in the time of Christ. The tree of knowledge and good and evil for Adam and Eve. For us, it's the hidden book. Because we're saying that when the angel of Revelation 18 comes down, what I'm saying, he's been typified by the angel of Revelation 10. And when the angel of Revelation 10 comes down, the scriptures plainly tells us he has a little book open in his hand, and John's told to go take and eat that little book. But when that angel of Revelation 18 comes down, you don't see no book in his hand, do you? But if you're studying prophecy, you see it. It's the hidden book. It's the hidden manna. It's the only people that are studying prophecy are going to see that manna. That's part of the test. You have to see it. You have to eat it. Then on the same page, on the bottom, it's the second angel. Speaking of the arrival of the second angel, which was on April 19th, 1844, we will show you why. It says, another mighty angel was commissioned to descend to the earth. Jesus placed in his hand a writing. Most of us aren't familiar with the fact that when the second angel arrived, he also had something he had to eat. Okay? A writing in his hand. I'd say that because when the first angel arrived, he had something in his hand and they were to eat it. So when the second angel arrives with a writing in his hand, you're to eat it. And the message of the second angel is the identical message to the angel of Revelation 18. Babylon is fallen, is fallen. So both the first and the second angel in the Millerite history are typifying the angel of Revelation 18. Okay, next page. We read these last night. Our work at the end of the world is to combine all the messages, and that's what we're saying, brothers and sisters. And when that angel came down on 9/11, he was typified by not only the first angel that came down with a little book open in his hand, but also by the second angel that came down with a writing in his hand. We don't see anything in Revelation 18's angel's hand, but upon the testimony of two, we know there's something in his hand that you and I are required to eat. And in the church of Pergamos, and we're living in the time of Pergamos. If you've studied the seven thunders, this is Pergamos. Pergamos is the church of compromise that prepares the way for Thyatira, the papacy. Brothers and sisters, the only reason the papacy isn't already persecuting people that aren't keeping Sunday sacred is because of 9/11. 9/11, Islam comes back into history, and the role of Islam is to provide an umbrella of protection while God's people are being sealed, Revelation 9:4. When Islam came into history at 9/11, the papacy was fully prepared to strike, but Islam enters into history. The world's turn to deal with radical Islam. The sealing of the 144,000 begins, and we're on borrowed time, brothers and sisters. But we're in the history that leads to the placing of the papacy on the throne of the earth. That's Thyatira. The history that comes before Thyatira is Pergamus. And the promise to Pergamus, if you turn to page 14, the last reference on page 14 says, "He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches. To him that overcometh will I give to eat of the hidden manna." In the time of Pergamus, 9/11, papacy about to be put on the earth. The angel comes down, the angel that has been typified by the angel of August 11th, 1840, the angel that's typified by April 19th, 1844, because you got to combine them. That angel comes down, but you don't see in the scriptures a representation of anything in his hand. But this is Pergamus. You have to eat the hidden manna. You can see the manna in his hand if you're studying prophecy and using the right rules. And the rule says, upon the testimony of two, a thing is established. That angel that came down on August 11th, 1840, and April 19th, 1844, both those angels had something in their hand that we had to eat. And they're typifying the angel of Revelation 18. We better eat that manna. It's the hidden manna. And what does it say? "Will I give him to eat of the hidden manna, and will give him a white stone, and in the stone a new name written." When you eat the little book, get a new name. What's it mean to get a new name? It means you are professing to be in a covenant relationship with Jesus Christ. All right? Go to Jeremiah 15. If you're not familiar with that, Jeremiah 15. When you eat the little book, brothers and sisters, you are professing. And God's accepting your profession that you've entered into a covenant relationship. But even though you and I agree to enter into a covenant relationship with Jesus Christ, brothers and sisters, what he does is he tests us. When the children of Israel came to Sinai at the giving of the law, how many times did they say, "Everything the Lord has said we will do"? 3 times. But did they do it? No, they died in the wilderness. He tested them. They failed the final test, the 10th test. But in Jeremiah 15, verse 16, it says, "O Lord, thou knowest, remember me and visit me, and revenge me of my persecutors. Take not away in thy long..." I should have started in verse 16, right? That's what I said, 15, 16. "Thy words were found, and I did eat them, and thy word was unto me the joy and rejoicing of mine heart, for I am called by thy name." You see, when you eat the little book, you're called by God's name. You enter into a covenant relationship with him. On 9/11, brothers and sisters, everyone that accepts the premise of 9/11, that this is the arrival of the third woe, that this is the restraint of Islam, that the judgment of the living begins, that the sealing of the 144,000 starts, that the sprinkling of the latter rain begins. Any one of us that accepts that premise is saying, "I'm entering into covenant with Christ." But what we don't seem to know is that at that point, he is going to test us to see if we're genuine about our commitment. Okay, and this is a proof text, brothers and sisters, that this testing process is not for those Adventists that are refusing to acknowledge that 9/11 represents anything. It's for this movement. It's for this movement. And therefore, the fanaticism that's marked in the scriptures is the fanaticism that comes into this movement. The scriptures isn't warning us about fanaticism in the Hindu religion in India. It just isn't. It's warning about fanaticism that has a direct impact on you and I. Nothing more blind than Laodiceans who refuse to see. Okay. All right, so here we are. We're ready to begin this presentation, and probably the time is up, okay? Page 15, okay? Ezra 7:9. Go with me to Ezra 7:9, if you would. We have recapped last evening's presentation. I notice I've only met Brother Steve the times that I've come to Eastonville. So those are weekends. So maybe I've been around Brother Steve maybe 4 weekends through the years. And it's like this, during the weekend, maybe he and I talked when he arrived yesterday for maybe, not an hour, but he and I talked one-to-one for, let's say, an hour. And maybe, but I'll get to talk to him for 30 minutes before I get out of here tonight, maybe not. And that's what it's been. And maybe I've been here and met with him 4 times. So actually, our relationship is based probably on 8 or 9 hours at the most of actual face-to-face time. And you know what I already know about him? He weeps real easily, okay? He acknowledges that here, so I can acknowledge it too, okay? Praise God. I'm not that way. I'm not that way typically, okay? In fact, the most emotional outburst that I ever have is when I'm up at the pulpit. Some people, a lot of you have seen me have some weepy moments, but it's up here. When I'm not here, you ask my wife, it's almost disgraceful the things I haven't wept at, okay? I'm not that type of person, okay? But I want you to know, just so you got it for the record, some of these people in this movement that I think are wrapped up in fanaticism right now, I've wept over what's going on with their families in this time period. Okay? It may sound like I don't care about what I'm saying and I don't care about these people, but I can remember one time, first time I ever met a guy, I knew him. He'd been on our mailing list for years, and I went to a camp meeting, and he was up front, and he was presenting the message of Daniel 11:40-45, like no one I'd ever seen. And I knew it was an echo of a work that I'd been involved with for over 10 years at that point in time, and I seen a man up there that got it, and the Lord was using him. And it was tears of joy. So if you're thinking that I got some kind of bone to pick with these brothers that have picked up some wrong premises and principles, you're misreading what's going on. My responsibility is to move beyond that and try to give you a warning that the time is here when you and I are going to demonstrate whether we have oil in our vessel or not. And Satan is trying to prevent us from being prepared through the introduction of false teachings, like he always does. And for me not to say anything because you happen to be infatuated with one of these personalities out there would be rebellion on my part to be quiet. I'm not going to do it. But I love these guys just as much as you do. Okay? Ezra 7:9 says this. For upon the first day of the first month began he, Ezra, to go up from Babylon. And on the first day of the 5th month came he to Jerusalem according to the good hand of God upon him. Okay, so what this is saying is that right here, this is the first day of the first month. Ezra comes out of Babylon, and we're going to find that he arrives in Jerusalem on the first day of the 5th month. That's what's illustrated down here. But he's bringing with him the 3rd decree, which goes into effect on the 10th day of the 7th month. That's here, 457. Okay? Now, this is part of what Samuel Snow understood as he put together the midnight cry message of the Millerite history. This is part of his logic, okay? So when you get down here to 1844, this is the first day of the first month, which equates in the Gregorian calendar, after you transpose it from the Karaite reckoning of time, to April 19th, 1844. And the first day of the fifth month equates to August 15th, 1844, and the 10th day of the seventh month equates to October 22nd, 1844. But Ezra, he's coming out of Babylon right here on the first day of the first month. In Gregorian time, which they didn't have in 457, he came out of Babylon on April 19th, 457 BC, all right? Don't hold me to that. I know that that's not valid. I'm just wanting you to see the beginning and the ending, okay? But chapter 8 of Ezra is repeat and enlarge, okay? He tells us this about Ezra in chapter 7, verse 9. But go to chapter 8. He's going to repeat now. Verse 15. He's come out of Babylon. Now he's going to tell us something about his trip out of Babylon. He comes out on the first day of the fifth month, up here, right here. Okay, he comes out of Babylon. And in verse 15 it says, "And I gathered them together to the river that runneth to Ahava, and there we abode in tents 3 days. And I viewed the people and the priests, and found there was none of the sons of Levi." So I want you to see that when Ezra comes out of Babylon, he goes just so far to the river Ahava, and he tarries. Okay? And you know what Sister White says about that? It's in your notes. It says, Ezra had expected that a large number would return to Jerusalem, but the number who responded to the call was disappointingly small. The disappointment of Ezra is here in the first day of the first month. He comes to the river Ahava. He realized very few people came out of Babylon with him, but more importantly, he realizes there is no Levites. Okay, they're going to initiate the temple service, and there's no Levites. He's disappointed. This is the first disappointment for the Millerites, and Ezra is typifying it. So what did Ezra do? If you read on in the following verses, what does Ezra do at this point? He sends back into Babylon and calls the Levites out of Babylon. Okay, there's a message, come out of Babylon. Okay, so you have Ezra coming out of Babylon on the first day of the first month. Then he tarries, sees there's no Levites, he's disappointed, and he does a call out of Babylon. That's the second angel's message, brothers and sisters. That's the second angel's message typified by Ezra right here. And what do we know about Christ? He illustrates the end with the beginning. So when you get to the first day of the first month in 1844, that's where the tarrying time of the parable of the 10 virgins is marked, right where Ezra was tarrying time. That's the first disappointment of the Millerites. And this is where the second angel comes down out of heaven, which his message is, come out of Babylon. Who's he calling out of Babylon? The Levites. Because in here, the Levites are going to be purified as an offering. You follow the logic? Yes? No? Maybe so? Okay. He gets to Jerusalem on August 15th. So from here to here is one period of time, and then from here to here is another period of time. In the Millerite history, this is the period of time we call the midnight cry. This is the doubt and uncertainty of the first disappointment, okay, where the fanaticism comes in. All right, you with me? Okay, so about a year and a half ago, Emiliano had been in India and he was sick, big time sick, scary sick. Brother Mark was there, and Brother Mark's a very serious health reformer. And we were sort of kind of casting lots about who's going to give Emiliano some herbal treatments and some massage and some fever treatments. And Brother Mark says, I never get sick, I'll do it. Okay, so Mark got that lot, and he was really sick for a long time thereafter because he got that sickness. That's how bad it was. And everyone knew it was that bad. And Emiliano's over there in the little trailer sending out notes. Jeff, come over. I have something I want to share. And I'm thinking, what are the excuses I can use not to go over there and get in that little trailer with Emiliano? So finally I went over, and I stood in the doorway, and he started telling me about Ezra 7:9. Okay, I'll step in there and listen to it. And I shared it the next day on live stream and recording. And I was wrong. I was wrong about these dates, August 15th and April 19th. But nevertheless, you could see something was there. Okay. And that my daughter heard it, so she spent the evening looking up everywhere in the scriptures that the first day of the first month is marked and the first day of the fifth month. So it began to develop characteristics on these two way marks. Are you following the logic? Okay, so what I've done now to acquaint you with what I've done, I've showed you at the beginning of the 2,300 years, these are the way marks that are marked by Ezra 7:9, and that in the history of Ezra, these are the characteristics of these way marks that we can discern. But when we get to this history leading up to 1844, the Millerite history, now we have some more historical evidence to place upon these way marks, but we're going to go one step further. We're going to use William Miller's Rules of Prophetic Interpretation, which teach if you want to understand a subject, you look everywhere that subject is found in the scriptures and you bring it together and let the scriptures define what it means. So I need to have a time check now, my brother Rich.
51 minutes.
Okay, we'll go a little bit further. So what are we going to do here? Anyone know what we're going to do? We're going to start looking everywhere in the scriptures where the first day of the first month is marked and see what that teaches us about this way mark. Right? Okay, so on page 16 of your notes, and if your Bible's still open to Ezra, go to Ezra 10, verse 16 and 17. Because when Ezra finally gets to Jerusalem, all right? Now let me tell you, this is proof texting. When you find the first day of the first month, it's never going to be again the first day of the first month in 457 or the first day of the first month in 1844. All we're looking at is the first day of the first month. And if it fits, we're going to place it, and every one of them fit. So even in the story of Ezra, this isn't the first day of the first month when he came out of Babylon. This is later on when they're in Jerusalem. And they're going to realize that some of the men that lived in Babylon had married pagan wives, Babylonian wives, and they're going to realize that's wrong. Okay, verse 16 says in Ezra 10, "And the children of the captivity did so, and Ezra the priest with certain chief of their fathers after the house of their fathers, and all of them by their names were separated and sat down on the first day of the 10th month to examine the matter." What they're examining is, what do we do with the fact that these people that came out of Babylon are married to Babylonish women? It can't be that way. We can't have it. So they're going to sit down on the first day of the 10th month and figure out how they're going to address it. All right? And then in verse 17 it says, "And they made an end with all the men that had taken strange wives by the first day of the first month." So in the scriptures, on the first day of the first month, the strange wives are separated. This is in the history of Ezra. But how does this impact 1844? It's because right here, brothers and sisters, at the first disappointment, the Protestants were separated from the Millerites. This was the end of the temple cleansing of the Protestants. They closed the doors, and now there was a separation. From this point on, what the Lord is going to do with the Millerites is He's going to lead them to understand that those Protestants have become the daughters of Babylon. Okay, they've been separated. Do you see that? Yes? Okay, so this is the tarrying time for the Millerites. It's the first disappointment. It's the separation from the Millerites and the Protestants two temple cleansings in that history. The first was the Protestants, because judgment always begins with the house of God. And the end of the temple cleansing for the Protestants at this point is the beginning of the temple cleansing for the Millerites. All right? The temple cleansing has three primary steps. An empowerment to a testing message when a divine symbol comes down. Then a visual test. And then the door closes. Okay, for the Millerites, the divine symbol that comes down is the second angel right here. And he has a writing in his hand. And what's the writing say, according to Sister White? Babylon is fallen, is fallen. This is the arrival of the second angel's message on August 19th, 1844. The visual test is going to take place at the midnight cry, where the living testimony is lifted up. And the Protestants come out of Babylon and stand with them. And that test ends when the door is shut on October 22nd, 1844. The Millerites are now going to be cleansed. Their cleansing begins where the cleansing of the Protestant temple ended. The Protestant temple cleansing began when the angel of Revelation 10 came down, empowered the message. The visual test for the Protestants was this chart. And it led to the door closing for them right here. At that point, the Protestants and the Millerites were separated. The Millerites had separated from the strange wives. Do you follow the logic? Okay. This one here is a bit tricky for some of us. Doesn't have to be, but I'm forewarning you, it usually is. First, we're looking at the first day of the first month. Turn with me, if you would, to Ezekiel 29. Ezekiel 29. Verse 17 says, "And it came to pass in the 7th and 20th year, in the first month, in the first day of the month, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying," okay, so here's the first day of the first month in Ezekiel. And what did the word of the Lord say to Ezekiel? It says, "Son of man, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, caused his army to serve a great service against Tyrus. Every head was made bald, and every shoulder was pilled. He had no wages, nor his army for Tyrus, for the service that he had served against it. Therefore, thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I will give the land of Egypt unto Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and he shall take her multitude, and take her spoil, and take her prey, and it shall be the wages for his army. I have given him the land of Egypt for his labor, wherewith he served against it, because they wrought for me, saith the Lord God." On the first day, brothers and sisters, follow this. On the first day of the first month, God pays the king of the north for services rendered. In Ezekiel 29, he's paying Nebuchadnezzar, the king of the north, for being his rod of chastisement in that history. He says, I used Nebuchadnezzar as my rod of chastisement, but I never paid him. So what I'm going to pay him is a country, Egypt. And it takes place on the first day of the first month. Everyone got that? Yes? So here's what I'm going to tell you, brothers and sisters, and it's easy to see. On the first day of the first month in 1844, the Protestants were separated from the Millerites, and the Protestants ceased to be God's chosen people and began to be the daughters of Babylon. The first horn of the United States was given to the papacy for the work that the papacy had done from 538 to 1798. On the first day of the first month, the horn of the church was given to the king of the north for services rendered. You follow the logic? I told you it was a tricky one. But it's valid. Okay, now where do we have a second witness to that? Well, a clear second witness is Manasseh. It's a progressive fall. These 7 kings conclude with the 7 thunders. They're marking the progressive fall of the glorious land, of whom Manasseh was the king of the glorious land, a 2-horned power. So the first horn of the United States is conquered in the Millerite history. When do you suppose the second horn of the state is conquered? On the first day of the first month, here at the end of the world. I'm here to tell you, brothers and sisters, the United States was conquered at 9/11. The only reason the Sunday law didn't come at 9/11 is because Islam came into history and bought you and I some time to prepare our character for the seal of God. All right? That's what's being taught by this lesson. This lesson here on the first day of the first month, it is profound. Okay? But notice the last verse in the chapter, verse 21. It says, in that day, what day? In what day? The first day of the first month. In that day will I cause the horn of the house of Israel to what? What causes the budding out? The sprinkling begins right here, brothers and sisters, on the first day of the first month. Of course, that's what we're saying about 9/11 too, isn't it? This is where the sprinkling begins. But I want you to make a distinction here. This is the budding out. Because if the Lord allows us, if the Lord holds the sun in the sky a little bit today, where we get a little bit of extra time into these presentations, we're going to get to the budding out of Aaron's rod. All right? Aaron's rod, when it comes out, it's not just budding out, it already has the fruit on it. Okay, and you want to know where Aaron's rod is brought out of the most holy place, and you want to recognize that it's not simply budding out. The almonds are already there because the fruit of the budding out is the harvest time. It's not the beginning, so you have to see that. But here on the first day of the first month, the sprinkling begins, all right? The budding out. Everyone with me on that? And that's what began in the Millerite history. They began to get the light of the second angel. And at 9/11, we began to get the light on the fourth angel. And the United States was given to the papacy. And the papacy takes control of the United States, according to Sister White, when the Constitution was overthrown. And brothers and sisters, if you don't think the Patriot Act overthrew the Constitution, you don't understand what took place at 9/11. Okay, we're just on borrowed time. All right? One more and then we'll take a break. I don't want to get my brother Rich nervous. All right? Are you still awake? Okay. Exodus 17:17. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Genesis 8:13. You got to know Genesis 8:13 before you can get to Exodus 17:17. Genesis 8:13. There's a drying up of the water on the first day of the first month. 8:13. It's in your notes, Sister Kathy. Under the flood ends. Verse 13 of Genesis 8 says, and it came to pass in the 601st year, in the first month, in the first day of the month, that the waters were dried up from off the face of the earth. Now, right here, brothers and sisters, the waters are dried up. Okay? In the scriptures, go back to Jeremiah 15. We've already been to Jeremiah 15. Jeremiah 15. Okay, this will take a minute. We'll work through this. We'll work through the drying up of the waters and we'll take a break. Is that okay? Okay, in Jeremiah 15. And brothers and sisters, I want to tell you, this stuff about the first day of the first month and the first day of the fifth month, it's absolutely profound. Amen. But it is like kindergarten material once you step away beyond that and go to the 120. So I'm just telling you, we're just building a platform for some light here at the end of the day. If we can get there, that'll blow your socks off. All right, it's just unreal. Okay, so in Jeremiah 15, I'm saying those things because I believe they are true, but I'm also trying to keep your mind stimulated where you can keep focused in, all right? Jeremiah 15, verse 16 is where we looked at last time. It says, thy words were found and I did eat them. In the Millerite history, when did they eat the little book? August 11th, 1840, right? Okay. Thy words were found and I did eat them. August 11th, 1840. Thy words And thy word was unto me the joy and rejoicing of my heart. And Sister White says the eating of the little book represents the glad reception and comprehension of the word. That's what Jeremiah is saying. It's the joy and rejoicing of my heart. He's agreeing with Ellen White, right? And for I am called by thy name. He enters into a covenant relationship. O Lord God of hosts, I sat not in the assembly of the mockers, nor rejoiced. I sat alone because of thy hand, for thou hast filled me with indignation. When did the Millerites sit alone because of God's hand? Right here. The Lord held his hand over a mistake in the figures of this chart. And they said, the Lord's coming in 1843. And because of his hand, they're separated from the Protestants. And when they're separated, they're setting alone, right? Everyone know this, right? This is old material, okay? Verse 17, I sat not in the assembly of mockers, nor rejoiced. I sat alone because of thy hand, for thou hast filled me with indignation. Why is my pain perpetual and my wound incurable, which refuses to be healed? Will thou be altogether unto me as a liar? Why is God a liar to them here? Habakkuk 2. It will not lie. Right here. This is the first day of the first month. This is the first disappointment. They're disappointed because of God's hand covering a mistake on the chart. Though the vision tarry, wait for it will surely come. It will not lie. So in verse 18 he says, therefore thus say, why is my pain perpetual, my wound incurable, which refuses to be healed? Wilt thou be altogether unto me as a liar? As what? Waters that dry up. Waters that fail. This is the second witness that on the first day of the first month, 1844, the waters dry up. So all you have to do is go to Exodus 17. I thought it was 17:7. That might be a typo. We'll find out shortly. Yeah, 17:7. That's a typo.
Where's the typo?
In my notes. Where it says the flood ends, Genesis 8:13, Jeremiah 15:18, and then underneath it says Exodus 17:17. It should be Exodus 17:7. All right, and in Exodus 17:7 it says, and he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah because of the chiding of the children of Israel, because they tempted the Lord, saying, is not the Lord among us or not? And there's two times in the traveling of the children of Israel where they're brought to Meribah and Massah. And what happens there? Massah? What happens there? The waters dry up. Okay, so what does Massah mean? It means a testing. Okay, when the waters dry up, brothers and sisters, the testing process for the Millerites begins, right where the testing process of the Protestants ends. What's Meribah mean? Quarrel, provocation, strife, controversy, the debate. It means debate. This is where the debate starts at the tarrying time in Isaiah 27. Okay, what's the debate of the Millerite history? The quarrel, what's the quarrel? Who's it between? The Protestants and the Millerites. Now, can the Protestants refute the Millerite prophetic message in this history? No way. It's airtight. So what's the attack of the Protestants? My brother and my brother's newlywed wife. There's no way you can see the work on this board over here, all right? And the work on this board is the visual that accompanies the audio that you must see. Okay? So, at the first disappointment, the Protestants and the Millerites, they enter into a quarrel, right? So I'm gonna tell you something, and then we're going to take a break. But it's okay to let this sink in, because most of you profess to believe that the Millerite history is repeated to the very letter. When the quarrel begins, can the Protestants refute the Millerite prophetic message? No. So what do they use as their argument? Character. character assassination. Who is it that is the focus of the character assassination? William Miller. Think about it, brothers and sisters. This is 9/11. This is 9/11. This is where the fanaticism starts. We have nothing to fear for the future except we forget the Lord's leading and teaching in our past history and experience. There is a bright light set up behind us, which is the midnight cry. This history is being repeated. It is not me. Now maybe I am, but I'm responding. It is not me that is currently trying to build the ministry I'm in by tearing down another man's ministry. All right? And if you're not aware that's going on, lucky you. All right? Shall we pray? Heavenly Father, we are living in serious and solemn times, times which you have forewarned us that are fulfilled in the history of Laodicea, a period when your people believe everything's all right when everything's all wrong. We believe that we have the understanding and the presence of Christ within us, but we don't. We need that presence. We need the understanding. And we ask that this day, this very Sabbath day, that you would move forward in your work for each one of us to accomplish that work within us. We believe by the external signs that are going on in the world that your return is very, very near. And we're beginning to see from the prophetic record that the repetition of the Millerite history is identifying that we're on the verge of being awakened at the midnight cry. And we do not want to be among those that have to turn at that point and go seek for oil because it will be unavailable. We thank you for bringing us all here safely. We ask for your continued presence and guidance through the rest of this Sabbath day in Jesus' name. Amen.